Hello guys, this is your friend Naruto Audio Fanfics and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Kage-level Naruto fell in love with Temari? Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Naruto just huffed and shook his head with a tired smile at his sensei's constant nonchalant behavior. Even during times like this you could count on him whipping out his porn during some major battle. Naruto's bruised and battered body needed serious attending to, so for the safety of Naruto he needed to be carried. Naruto had his arms around his shoulders while Kakashi held him up. Naruto closed his eyes to let the tiring sensations set in. Fighting pain really pushed his body to the limit, but thankfully the fox's regeneration abilities were kicking in, only to harm him in the end, spending more and more off his precious chakra. As his eyes closed, his other senses heard the murmuring of crowds ahead. Naturally his mind never processed the thought that the crowds of villagers and shinobi were waiting for him. His thoughts ranged to the many possibilities that would cause the entire populace of Konoha to wait outside the semi-protective tents and huts set up for the now homeless villagers. But when Kakashi carried Naruto over a small hill, even though Kakashi already saw the masses earlier, it was still a sight to see. All Naruto could see over the lush plains was every single villager, cheering and shouts. Good praises were sent to him. Welcome back. We believed in you. You're a hero, Naruto. Welcome home. All these shouts of praises, burned into his memory, all the faces that once scorned or ignored him, now filled with happiness and excitement at the thought of him returning safe and sound, children being taught to run away from him, they now cheered his return. They've all been waiting for your return, Kakashi said, looking at Naruto's facial expressions with worry. Naruto was now facing his dream. Most people don't know how to react, some react negatively. Kakashi's thoughts travel back to the first time he told him his goals. My dream. Naruto paused with a look on his face that made Kakashi regret asking, is to be greater than the Hokage. He shouted to the skies. I'll make everyone in the village acknowledge my existence. Naruto's look on his face showed disbelief. As if this was one big cruel joke, he couldn't believe that he could be loved by the people of his village. Years of silent torment and disregard for his life, Kakashi let Naruto down while watching him closely. I told them everything, said the smaller version of the boss summons Katsuyu, surprising Naruto that he didn't notice the small summons on his shoulder. Naruto. Kakashi paused as he watched the crowds of Konoha run to their new hero. You've done good, Kakashi said as he patted him on the back briefly, then moved to the side as countless shinobi and citizens surrounded him, hugging and patting him on the back, praising him, and all in a very passionate sense. Are you hurt? What was he like? Naruto was still hesitant to all the attention he was receiving. Never before, ever did his actions receive credit. When he stopped Gaara, who was there to thank him. When he returned Tsunade, nothing. When he fought and struggled against the forces of Akatsuki, there was no recognition in his achievements. Naruto found himself at one point doubting that his achievements will ever be heard, that all his efforts would be just pushed away into a category of the demon. But of course his failures, his mistakes, his undercomings, they were the news that always reached to the gossips of the village. When he failed in returning Sasuke, he could literally feel the hate being aimed at him. The name-calling increased and somehow worsened. It was as if he pushed the Uchiha away. He was the scapegoat to the deaths during Kyuubi Rampage, and now he was again being unrightfully blamed for the defection of the damn Uchiha. The time Asuma died, killed by Akatsuki member Hidan, Naruto never hated himself as much as he did then. He considered just ending it all. He wasn't a precious person, but he knew him and he knew this much. He had a fiancé, he had a child, he had a family, he was loved, and because of him, he died, a cold bloody death. They told him they didn't blame him, they told him it wasn't his fault, but Naruto could see in their eyes, the look of what if Naruto didn't even exist, Kurenai wouldn't even look him in the eye, Ino still hasn't talked to him yet, no matter how hard he tried to amend things between them. Shikamaru was smart, he didn't blame it on him, Naruto could see it, he knew of the fox, he knew it wasn't his fault. Whether it was his fault or not, it didn't stop the gossip, those hateful words spread around, only tarnishing his reputation further. But now, his dream of being loved by the people of his village, he was finally being acknowledged, he was now getting the recognition he finally earned for all the years, and yet it seemed foreign to him, the feeling of love surrounding him, the aura of caring was suffocating. He smiled a small smile. Zetsu Venus flytrap body slowly emerged from the large tree branch, the look of surprise on one face and anger on the other. I never thought pain could be defeated, the white-headed side said. We better tell Toby. Let's go, the other side said as the body slowly inkazed itself and vanished inside the branches. Shikaku Nara watched with a small smile, seeing the Uzumaki boy being praised and hugged. It wasn't hard to know that his life ambition was to be Hokage, and for the recognition of the village, he regularly shouted it across the village when he was younger. Thankfully he had matured faster than he had expected. Shikaku took this small time to see the differences in the young blonde. He was only 16, yet he saw that he was growing into his father's look. It didn't really take a genius to see who Naruto resembles. He was a close friend with Inoichi and his family, and they were well known for their unique hair color. Blonde was very rare in these parts, and the Yamanaka clan were the only blondes in all of the Land of Fire. So Shikaku spoke this over with the third. And what do you know, Nara intelligence brings him to a, how would you say, troublesome, S-rank secret. He was getting very powerful if he defeated a man that not only the 5th and several Anbu platoons couldn't overcome, or even Jiraiya of the Sannin. He defeated the current Kage when he was even younger. He has killed Akatsuki members, he truly was the strongest of his generation, maybe even more so than the former generations as well. He felt a spike of chakra behind him and saw a masked Anbu appear. What is it? He said in an annoyed tone. Emergency meeting, he said quickly, while Shikaku groaned inwardly. You're to report to the council room immediately, he spoke quickly and firmly. Shikaku sighed. Already? He said, not really prepared, mentally or emotionally. He hasn't even seen his wife yet. He would be worried for his son, but he was a trained and talented shinobi, he would be fine. No matter how long it took for him, the thought of Naruto's progress remained with him throughout the day and through the council meeting. She used Katsuyu to protect the village, Sakura said, pausing, trying her best to hold in the pent-in feelings. And she's been unconscious ever since, she said with worry. I don't know when she will wake up, Sakura finished off, staring at her sensei with emotion. Tsunade, Naruto said, looking at her with concern. Sakura looked up at Naruto. Already he could see that he was blaming himself for Tsunade's condition. Sakura needed to talk to him about this soon. The council meeting was just as boring as he suspected. The room was entirely empty apart from the large stone table and the 5 large chairs on both sides, and a large wooden chair with the Fire Lord's symbol on it. On one side was the 5 Fire Lord advisors and consultants. In front of them was several papers presented earlier on the damages and costs of the attack. On the other side were the representations of Konoha, the conservative advisors Koharu Udatane and Homura Mitokado, the 2 former teammates of Hiruzen Sarutobi, Shikaku the Jonin commander, and Danzo the head of the Foundation or Root Corps, and Anbu captain, only known to everyone in the room except for Danzo as Yamato. At the head of the table was the Fire Daimyo. He was a man around his late 40s, he had an aged and pampered look about his face, his suit was full of ceremonial instruments and his skin was pale and sagging, his face was covered with exotic makeup and his scent was strong with expensive perfumes. He was a man that was hard to respect for a ninja, who was forced to embrace a Spartan-like living. As Shikaku noticed the tension in the room rise, he brought himself out of his musings to properly listening to the conversation. We plan to continue working with the other countries against the threat posed by Akatsuki, Homura stated to the Fire Lord consultant. The Fire Lord advisor spoke up. They were all dressed in the same black uniform with the top hat and fire insignia, but all of them looked very different to the other. The young man with glasses spoke with concern. After what happened to the village, he paused looking around at the daimyo. The land of fire will put every effort into getting it rebuilt. But first we'll have to come up with a budget, he said, carrying off while looking at the papers below him, looking at the prices and such. And consider the strain on the other countries, he said with a sigh, seeing the workload ahead of him. Danzo really couldn't care any less about budget woes right now. His priorities were set and he was ready to pounce on his goals. There's something else we should consider first, he said while looking downwards with an evil smirk. Shikaku looked at Danzo with suspicion. He never trusted the old war hawk. Who will be the next Hokage? He said in a respectful voice. So it has come to that. Shikaku's mind started seeing the plan that Danzo was pulling. Can we not wait until Tsunade has recovered? The fire daimyo said with curiosity. He was always a fan of Tsunade's reign. She was kind and fair in her judging, and the economy and ninja population has been slowly picking up since the invasion. My lord, Kaharu said, addressing the daimyo, Tsunade is still in a coma. We can't decide on a plan for the village when we don't know when she will wake up, she explained to the daimyo. Besides, she is partially responsible for Konoha's destruction, said Kaharu with no disbelief in what she said. I'd thought to choose Jiraiya, the daimyo said aloud to himself. I liked him, but he's gone now, he said, thinking about his favorite author, in his opinion the best author of all time. So who will it be? The daimyo asked, curious to their suggestion. Danzo smiled at the sights of a plan going off without a hitch. Well, Shikaku saw the smirk and his mind set of to stopping him. I nominate Hitaki Kakashi, he said a bit louder than he intended. Danzo eyed the Nara. Inside he was cursing loudly, bloody Naras. Oh ho, son of the White Fang, he thought of all the times he had met the man. He was powerful, respectful, well known, he saw no problem with it. Yes, why not? What do you all think? He asked his advisors. He's well known, powerful and respected, it's true. But don't you think he is a bit too young? Minato was even younger. Quote, who was his teacher? One of the advisors asked. The fourth Hokage. Homura answered immediately, finding the man not that bad of a choice. The daimyo chuckled, thinking of the connections. The fourth Hokage was Jiraiya's pupil and Jiraiya was the pupil of the third Hokage. He chuckled again. There's no problem then, he said, trying to carry on to other business. Danzo stood and smacked his cane downwards in anger. The third's teachings, he said as he stared directly at the daimyo, have as good as destroyed this village. The daimyo looked shocked at the revelation. The Fire Lord's advisors looked upset at the disrespect he was showing, but surprisingly Kaharu and Homura seemed interested in what he was saying. Akatsuki leader, who destroyed the village, was once Jiraiya's pupil, he said while looking at everyone present. A satisfied smirk emerged from his face, at seeing the silent Nara. This is the result of sympathizing with other countries and giving them power, he said off the bat. He really didn't plan to say this, but seeing the favor lean towards the son of the White Fang, he had enough. That sort of thinking is weak, he shouted. This weakness led to San's betrayal and allowed Orochimaru's plan to destroy Konoha. He felt that the daimyo was slowly understanding his side. It led to the formation of Akatsuki, he said, pausing after hearing the daimyo gasp. And to Sasuke, the last remaining Uchiha, leaving Konoha for his own secret purposes. He continued his rant to the silent council. What kind of Hokage do we need now? He asked the rhetorical question as his voice grew louder and louder. One who can put an end to this wretched situation, who can bring change to the ninja world and reinforce the laws that govern us. He paused, looking around. He slammed his able hand down on the desk. That man is me, he finished as he stared directly at the daimyo looking for answers. The room was silent. No one moved as the Fire Lord pondered over what Danzo said. He turned to his advisors. They all conversed between themselves, discussing the consequences and advantages if they chose Danzo. One advisor decided to speak for their decision. Maybe we should let Danzo take care of things, my lord, he said with a frown, obviously against the thought of Danzo being in charge. The Fire Lord pondered and felt that if his advisors approved, then he has no problem with the idea. He was a proven leader and it was only temporary. The Nara spoke. We can't let his fanaticism. All right, it is decided. In the mind of Nara Shikaku, he felt the cogs of his mind push and pull. If Kakashi was found unacceptable because of his teachings, then whom? A person who was respected and powerful, a person loved by the people and the ninja populace. His mind traveled to Naruto. He was far more powerful than Kakashi and he was well respected. He had the credentials, but he was too young. At best he will serve as a distraction for the Nara to come up with some other more qualified shinobi. I nominate Uzumaki Naruto. Unlike last time when he nominated Kakashi, it was taken as a serious notion. After nominating Naruto, he was half sure that most of the people currently here would have laughed if it wasn't for this serious demeanor that he was left with after that very passionate speech from Danzo. A chuckle escaped Homura. Please Nara, explain to us how Naruto would be a better candidate than Danzo here, he said as he gestured to the old war hawk who was surprisingly quiet after he blurted out Naruto's name. After today no one would dare speak against the wits of the Nara clan. Shikaku slowly took a deep breath in and exhaled as he readied himself for a lengthy argument that might run on for some time. Uzumaki Naruto, the sixth Hokage, he thought as the idea seemed more and more appealing as his mind. Well Shikaku, now that you are done, why don't we? Excuse me Homura. The Fire Lord cut in as he had a puzzled look about his face. I would like to hear him out. I have heard quite a bit of this Naruto character since I have arrived. He paused as he took the name under consideration. His pause caused for the two advisors to take this as a serious threat to their influence and power in their village. Fire Lord, I protest, he is far too young. Homura spoke, trying his best to take this nomination and ruin it as best as he could. The Fire Daimyo intrigued look about his face never left. Ah, true advisor, but I feel that we are entering a new age where age and power are being less and less related. The Fire Lord spoke in his politically experienced voice. Look at Itachi, Anbu captain at first memory, 12, 13, he said, unsure at the age he spoke about. And look at how it ended with him. He cracked under the pressure of all the responsibilities and why. Danzo stood angered at the daimyo foolishness. He was too immature emotionally. He was overwhelmed by the responsibilities of an Anbu captain and he acted it out. He had a limited amount of outlets and the loss of his close friend seemed to be the pushing point, Danzo pointed out. And now you are considering giving another young man even more responsibilities than that of an Anbu captain. Ask me, how would that end? In disaster, in chaos, he shouted, but the Fire Lord didn't seem fazed. Besides, he isn't as mature or emotionally prepared as the Uchiha prodigy. Please listen to reason, he is a mere genin, Kaharu said, backing up the claims of Danzo. Not to mention he graduated last in his class, Homura pointed out. A genin to Kage, it's unheard of, Kaharu shouted as loud as you could without being disrespectful. In Wind Country, their village Kage was previously a chunin. Now he is one of the more powerful and successful Kages of their small history. He looked at the other members of the meeting and sighed at seeing no progress. So true you three are in your claims, maybe he isn't prepared, but shouldn't that be assessed by his maturity and not that of others at the same age, he explained. The Fire Lord chuckled. After all this arguing we haven't even heard Shikaku's reasoning. He chuckled again. Shikaku, he said staring at him directly with respect, while Shikaku just sighed. Somehow everyone else did the arguing, he just initiated the controversy. Fire Lord, he said addressing the daimyo, I was told that you are permitted to hear S-rank secrets, he said while holding his hands to his chin. He could see everyone around him was pondering over what he would reveal. Yes Nara, I am permitted, unfortunately my advisors are not, he said as he gestured for them leave. The five left, all in a military-like manner, but some grumbling could be heard. Continue, he said as Shikaku stood, all in a respectful manner. Naruto Uzumaki is a genin true but, he said as he looked at the advisors, what Homura and Kaharu forgot to mention is that he was on the verge of graduating on his rookie year alone, he said in his aloof voice that could be considered a Nara accent. He graduated last of his class true, but in the Chunin exams he defeated the now special Jonin and Hyuga genius and the current Kage Gaara during the invasion, he said pausing for the Fire Lord to take all this in. We also looked over the plans of Orochimaru, apparently Gaara was there, trump card if you will and Naruto single-handedly defeated him, he said hoping to prove some sort of connection. He faced Orochimaru and Kabuto, a very skilled high Jonin, and defeated him with a technique that was ranked high A. He also, just recently defeated the one man, who destroyed this great village with a one jutsu, a man who not even Jiraiya or Tsunade could defeat, a man who led a terrorist group of the most powerful nuke nins ever. And most importantly he shows compassion and caring for every living person, he said with a nod. A ninja that shows mercy, ha, who could follow a man that wouldn't kill for his country, Danzo said with a chuckle. The Fire Lord spoke up, that is true, a shinobi that opposes killing, if they live how do we know we are not simply stopping someone who would try and kill me or you in the future, the Fire Lord explained, Shikaku say the reason in this, but the years with his child, had shown him Naruto's finer points. My son Shikamaru, said he felt death and evil when he was around the younger, current Kage Gaara, he said he felt he would kill him if he just said the wrong word, he paused. Naruto had the chance to kill him. He was near death's door and Naruto let him live, now because of Naruto's intervention he is living a happy and successful life, because of him our relations with Suna have never been stronger. Pain the leader of Akatsuki I was told he didn't kill him he gave him a chance at life and guess what happened next, Shikaku said, as he felt the bingo books raise his reward for his death right now. Nagato returned all the people he had killed, and if it wasn't for the kind heart of Naruto's we would be busy digging graves rather than rebuilding our village, he said with a sad smile. Naruto has made relations better with many of the smaller villages, Bird, Wave, Snow, Waterfall, I could go on but my point being made is that he gives Konoha friends and allies. Even if I remember correctly he has had several contacts from other countries willing to have political marriages involving only Naruto, Shikaku said with a perverted grin, apparently he has left a certain impression on the young women of our allies. Shikaku felt not only everyone, apart from Danzo, but himself find Naruto a more appealing leader than Danzo. Just outside, right now the people are cheering and praising him for what he has done, he said as he felt like he was doing something oh so right. He has the respect of the people and shinobi, he said with a smile knowing full well ever since the Chunin exams, Jonin have found the boy less of a nuisance. Unlike some other candidates, he said not even trying to ignore the glare that was directed to him. He was trained by Kakashi for his genin team, Shikaku said with a bored look, he is the apprentice of Jiraiya, he said again, He inhaled hard as he readied himself for some consequences to his actions, and as long as the S-rank law stands, he is not the child of Minato Namikaze, he said as the room went quiet. But the room erupted into shouts of protest and ramblings. The Fire Lord raised his hand as the remaining council members slowly grew quiet. He has the heritage, he said as he thought about the strength and power of the fourth. He has the power, he said as he knew of his adventures, facing Gaara, Neji, Orochimaru and Kabuto at a very young age and now the Akatsuki leader. He has the respect of the villagers and the shinobi of Konoha, he said as he watched the far window seeing the masses cheer for him so loudly. He had never seen them celebrate so happily even during the fourth Hokage's introduction party. Danzo saw the look in his eyes. He saw that Shikaku was convincing this idiotic daimyo. He stood with no care of respect. He has been taught the same teachings that have made the village how it is today. He said, pointing out at the damages. The teachings of the first was taught and embraced by the second, he in turn taught it to the third, said Shikaku. The third taught Jiraiya and Tsunade the fifth, each of them embraced the teachings. Jiraiya taught not just the fourth but his son as well, Shikaku explained as he watched the Fire Lord nod his head knowing the connections. Danzo presents change, Shikaku said glaring at the War Hawk. He says that these teachings have destroyed Konoha. He paused, seeing he had the daimyo full attention. But these teachings, these acts of compassion, the will of fire, all of these values that we hold close, are what we are. To embrace Danzo's changes of war and death, over peace and compassion for others, he simply shook his head. Naruto is currently the only, he thought for a second as he had always boy, but hearing what he has said, it shows him in this new light, he was no boy, he was, man, who will continue these teachings that have made us survive against 3 great shinobi wars, against odds greater than any we could comprehend, against invasion after invasion, whether it is Sound or Akatsuki we have survived and fought to become the greatest village, Shikaku said, he could imagine a huge nap after this. Naruto Uzumaki has earned this title more than any one of us, let alone, this old war hawk, Shikaku said pointing disrespectfully at Danzo. If. The Fire Lord raised his hand, Shikaku breathed in deeply as the daimyo rose from his seat. You have proven your case Shikaku, he said with a semi-smile. Anbu-san, how do you feel taking orders from Naruto? He asked politely. He always hated those masked fellows, very creepy vibe, just knowing that they could kill you at a moment's notice. Sure, the Jonin could do so just as easily, but the look they had about them didn't scream it out as much as a Jonin jacket. I have previously worked with Naruto through several missions as his commander, he said as he coughed slightly, pausing for effect. Naruto as an individual, is clumsy, loud, unorthodox, he acts before thinking, he's brash, straight to the point and stubborn. Danzo smiled at the man. I would have to say if Tsunade was here, she too would recommend Naruto for the position as the 6th Hokage, he said as Danzo for the 20th time stood up in anger. I protest. I have had enough of this disrespect. You will sit when you address me, Danzo, the daimyo said with a new-found emotion of annoyance spoken through his voice. He stood for a second and crumbled down glaring daggers at the Nara and Anbu. Anbu, continue. The Anbu captain continued, I speak for myself obviously, and not Tsunade, but in my small time in knowing Naruto, he said as he cleared his voice. I would risk my life for his, and I know exactly he would do the same, if not more, for me or any man, woman or child of Konoha. He stared directly at the daimyo. To me, sir, nothing makes him more fit to be a Hokage. He shows, he said as he chuckled slightly remembering the first time he met him. The will of fire. It was silent. I have heard enough, the Fire Lord spoke. He rose from his seat, closing his fan, so it is decided. Danzo closed his eyes, seeing his dreams taken away from him because of some Nara and Anbu. I the Fire Lord appoint Naruto Uzumaki as the Rokudaime Hokage, he said clearly. After the small expected announcement, neither of the advisors spoke out, whether they found Naruto fit for the position, nor did they have nothing to say at this point. The daimyo clapped his hands together and a messenger boy appeared through the only entry door. Yes, sire, said the small sickly-looking boy, covered in light clothing and bare dirty feet. Send Uzumaki Naruto to us, he said with a smile. Yes, sire, he answered and moved with surprising speeds. Danzo just grinded his teeth and made a signal. A root solider came and whispered some nonsense in his ear. A frown worn across his face, or what was shown of it. I have some urgent matters to attend to. My underling will handle any business in my absence, he said in voice that showed his displeasure. The root member sat in the chair as the advisors walked slowly back in. Danzo eyed Shikaku before leaving. He just returned it with a loud yawn as he rolled his shoulders. Bloody Nara, was the last thing the council heard before the poof of smoke closed around his body. We of the council have appointed you, Uzumaki Naruto, the Rokudaime Hokage, he repeated, his arms raised and his chin high and mighty. Naruto looked shocked. No, he was more than shocked. He shook his head, his knees were shaking, he needed a seat. Aye, he started. This was all too soon. First the villagers, now this. His dreams were being thrust at him far too soon. He looked around and found a spare chair. He rushed forwards and grabbed the seat and leaned back against the back and sighed as his knees nearly gave in. Do you accept? The daimyo asked, certainly pleased with the man so far, that is until his reaction to the news, which was, to the daimyo, a bit of character. He was everything he thought a leader should be. Before he announced his promotion, he showed a true confidence in himself. He seemed a bit shook up with the newfound love from the villagers, but it was all understandable for a former village pariah. He was far from gay. The orange book in his side pocket defiantly proved it, but he instantly noticed the handsome looks of the young blonde. Not that it mattered to him, it was just a matter of politics. It is a very important, if shallow, trait that have proceeded in the short time of politics. A cage is the face of their village. The better looking the face, the more appealing the village looks to an outside business owner. It's shallow, but it's human nature. The Fire Lord knew he was strong. That powerful aura that followed him as he entered the room just made his belief in this boy intensify. He looked at the boy worriedly. He really was beginning to see the upsides of this boy. If he refused, he might be forced into a corner with the issue and appoint the now less appealing Danzo. Well, he continued as the boy was still in shock, it was too soon. What about Sasuke? What about Tsunade? What about his promise? Why me? He managed to say, still in hard shock. The Fire Lord smiled kindly. He was young. We all wondered at first ourselves. He laughed a hearty laugh, but fortunately Shikaku here, he said, pointing at the scarred Nara, who saluted at the eventual leader. He nominated you, and well, that led to a very passionate response from Danzo, he said with a smile. He saw that Naruto still was unconvinced. He sighed in frustration. Please Naruto, stay seated and hear us out, he said as he gestured to the opposite seat to the daimyos. Naruto willingly sat down, feeling the weight of future responsibilities pulling him down. The daimyo pulled his fan out once more. He looked at the council and then Naruto. Please Naruto, explain to me, why not you, he said, waving the fan lightly. I'm too young, he said silently. A part of him knew he wasn't ready, another not wanting him to lose an opportunity at his lifetime goal. How old are you? The daimyo asked. 16, turning 17 in 2 months. Sir. The Kage, a personal friend of yours, I've been told, is also 16 and has been in office for several months, so I see age is no problem for Suna. then it is no problem for Konoha, he said with the familiar smile. I haven't even led a team, how could I even lead an entire village? Naruto asked, convinced that age was really couldn't be used as an excuse with these people. What proof does a man need to know how he can or can't lead? Does he need an array of battle scars or a record of battles and wars won? Does he need a shiny medal for a single act of good luck? He paused slightly. A leader to me needs to care for his fellow man, he needs to know sacrifice and loss, to me everything else will follow. He saw the resolve slowly leave the boy. I just don't know, it's too much. What if I mess up? Naruto said, never truly understanding the ramifications of being a leader in Kage until now. You are a strong young shinobi, you have defeated countless enemies, against amazing odds, you have more than what it takes to protect the weak and respected enough to lead your troops without their hesitation. He paused. You have the heritage of legends and the upbringings of a modest man that believes in loyalty and honor, he said, making the blonde scratch his head in embarrassment. Your case of complete loyalty to this village and its well-being has been rewarded, he said, patting his shoulder. First he pointed at a familiar Anbu. You have the support of the Anbu captain and his troops, then he pointed at Shikaku. You have the support of the Jonin commander, then he pointed at the two elderly advisors and shook his head in a, never mind them, motion, then he stepped back, gesturing to himself. You have the support and money of one of the richest men in the lands, he said very modestly. He brought Naruto towards the large stone ledge. Naruto, who still was only beginning to understand, was moved towards the ledge. He looked at the village below. He could see the small villagers working together, helping one another, rebuilding their lives once again. It pained his heart that he could have stopped all this destruction. But most importantly, you have the support of the people, he said in reserved voice. The people are who you protect, who you lead. He placed his hand on Naruto's shoulder. These people need your protection, they need you to lead. He turned him towards the daimyo. Will you lead your village? Will you become the 6th Hokage? Will you become the Rokudaime Hokage? The daimyo asked. Naruto paused. He felt confused as of why he was even considering going against his dream, his lifetime goal. What kept him going at long trainings? What kept him alive during those difficult times? What convinced him never to act out or fight back against the villagers' hateful ways? Suddenly he answered, without his mind even acknowledging, his voice spoke without his realization, until he finished. I accept the position, Daimyo-sama, Naruto said with a newly found smile. Thank you, Hokage-sama, your position will be announced in 2 days, he replied, happy with the results of his pushy attitude. Can I just ask one thing, sir? He said, feeling an issue needed to be attended to after all these events. Sure, what is? He asked. Naruto entered the Hokage's office. His office, just saying that seemed strange and unusual. He looked at the large chair and desk. He was surprised seeing the dark oak and ceremonial designs carved into the desk that were usually covered with loose business paperwork. He sat on the worn chair and instantly heard a knock to the door. Ah, come in, he said, not sure of how to welcome someone. Shizune entered and walked towards him. So how are you feeling? She said softly. Overwhelmed, he said simply. He looked around the room. 6 framed paintings, each of the Hokages in some sort of dramatic pose, and a single painting of the village. There was 2 spare seats and a couch in the corner, a large lamp in the other corner. He looked closer at each painting. The first Hokage had his arms crossed with a scary look about his face, and trees emerging from the ground upwards. The second Hokage held his hands together in a kai form with water rushing around in a dramatic fashion, and the ocean and sunset in the background. The third Hokage held his staff bow in one hand and a kunai in the other, wind blasting to one direction. The fourth had the Rasengan held in his hand, his legendary three-pronged kunai in the other with his yellow flash following his body, and his feet were planted on a red bumpy surface that was most likely the boss summons of the toads. "And how is the old lady?" he asked softly. He said as he looked at the fifth's picture, Tsunade missing her green jacket, wielding two chakra scalpels. He smiled at the look of seriousness about her face. He wondered what his painting would look like. "Unfortunately, she hasn't gotten any better. Only time will tell right now," she said, staring outside the room's single window. Shizune caught his attention. "Well, right now you will just have to deal, unfortunately." She sighed at the difficult times ahead. "You have an important meeting with a team from Kumo in half an hour, so be on your best behavior." Naruto just huffed and nodded. Shizune backed away before remembering something. "Hokage-sama, I almost forgot," she said as she left the office for a second and brought out the Hokage's hat and robe. "You need to wear this in the presence of foreign nins," she said as she threw the clothing to him. Naruto just caught the clothing effortlessly and looked at it suspiciously. "Don't worry, it's new clothes, not used by any of the other Hokages," she said with a sweat drop. She closed the door as she left and left Naruto to his business. He sighed as he put the Hokage hat on and then the robes. He felt the orange jacket and Hokage robes cling together uncomfortably. He sighed, took off both and replaced the orange jacket with the Hokage robe. He didn't button it. He really didn't feel like doing too much with the suit. He still had his black muscle shirt underneath and his necklace that he treasured greatly, even more so now. He looked in the mirror and didn't think he looked too bad. Not bad at all. The hat pushed his headband down, so he wrapped it around his right bicep, letting his hair down. He looked at the desk and saw the closed compartments. He opened the first three, full with empty sake bottles, of course. The fourth held several files, each under the different hidden village and secret folders on the few S-rank missions that had classified written all over it. Naruto was curious and went through a few. The first one he grabbed, Suna. It was fairly loaded with papers filled with their shinobi information and economic reviews and alliance papers. He looked closer at the alliance papers, just out of mere curiosity, and saw a letter written out by Gaara, with the heading, Political Marriage. His eyes squinted at the prospect of a political marriage, a person being forced to breed with another, sometimes without the other's consent, a life decision to be forced to love a stranger or deny and live a life of exclusion and political hate. Naruto really hated the idea of forced love. He lived a life of lonely nights. The thought that he or anybody would be used in some sort of political cementation of alliances. He wondered and thought that if he could make a law against political marriages, he smiled as he now had the power to overrule and make laws for the better of his village. The prospect excited him. He was a little curious of who was being offered on both sides, but before he could read it, Shizune entered with a huff. Shizune entered with a bow. Naruto sneered at this. "Kakashi is here," she said. "Ah, let him in," he said with uncertain voice, one that didn't know how the process went. Kakashi entered in his aloof manner, with Shizune following in tow, his orange book held out and his single eye reading the lines, as Shizune placed a pile of paperwork on his desk. Naruto was sure Kakashi saw him earlier, or heard something before, because with the Hokage robes and the being in the Hokage office, it doesn't take a genius to figure this out. "So what's new?" Kakashi asked, again in his nonchalant voice. Naruto just sighed and rubbed his temples. He threw a scroll to him and Kakashi grabbed it without looking up. "This is a very important mission that Shizune has set up in the absence of the Hokage," he said, gesturing to the woman at his side. "I need you to request some supplies and builders from Suna," he said. "Grab 10 or so Chunins and escort them back," he commanded. Kakashi saluted and left in a puff of smoke. Naruto turned to Shizune. "And I need you to keep Guy and Lee far away from the foreign builders," he said in a serious tone. "They are close friends and all, but I feel nightmares about them will affect productivity, he said as Shizune nodded and looked for the duo. The team from Kumo is here, Hokage-sama, she said, using the new honorific, which he knew he would never get used to. Send them in, Naruto said as he adjusted his hat, reading himself for his first official meeting. Naruto repeated as he thought about this extremely long day. He gave a heavy sigh to the air as his mind went numb with all the thoughts. Naruto walked slowly to his temporary housing unit. Originally he was offered a large wooden cabin home, with furnishings and luxury-level food, but Naruto gave his home to a large family of 12, seeing their thankful looks was a good enough replacement, even if he had to give up that ramen-filled cupboard he had his eye on the entire time. Every single flavor. He shook his head of images of that delicious, flavor-packed, every single flavor. People looked at Naruto strangely as they witnessed him slap his self silly while he walked into his small industrial tent, made of a single sheet of whatever tents were made of, covering the entire top and sides. He looked around feeling the mixed emotions suddenly lean upon him. He had one hell of a day to say at least. He tried to desperately find a distraction to his rising worries. He figured if he looked around a bit his mind would wander from the upcoming events. He looked around his room and had to admit, it was already better looking than his former apartment. Sure, there was no bathroom, there was a public bathroom open to all, with toilets and showers and such, but Naruto usually avoided it at all cost. He had a message burned into his mind whenever he saw that crummy place. Emergencies only. He didn't have a kitchen. He shared a campfire with his fellow villagers and a cook was assigned to every 50 or so civilians. He was just lucky enough to be assigned with his favorite chief. Being Hokage had nothing to do with it, honest. Also he did have a small box underneath his mattress, that contained all the ramen that he could find within the ruins. He had cuts all over his hands at the end but whenever he cooked a fresh brew and shared it with the children of neighboring tents, he always found himself saying, it was worth it. All in his lonesome tent was a mattress to the right that covered a good portion of the available space, a mahogany desk and matching bookcase filled with all the instructions and political history of his village and the other village and a large maroon-colored rug with golden-colored toads imprinted into the rug. There was also his summoning scroll leaning to the side. Now naturally he was originally concerned about just leaving it there, but seeing he trusted the Anbu that was assigned to the tent, he was fine with leaving it there. He would bring it with him on any long-distance mission or something, just to be safe though. He laid down on his dark maroon quilt and dirty white mattress and pillow. His mind was thinking about all the events that unfolded today, while his instincts were on high alert for another reason. Ever since the village accepted Naruto, he's never been happier, truly, but in some cases, certain females were a bit too acceptant. Women have been following his every movements. He was being tracked like a nuke nin on enemy territory. He knows he would have been jumped by now if it wasn't for the Anbu nins outside. And he had to assign the very powerful Anbu to say the least. Believe it or not, Naruto knew this was going to happen. It wasn't arrogance or anything, nothing like that at all, but during his travels with the pervert, he stopped at many villages and cities, and he was constantly surrounded by groups of giggling girls, pointing at him, with blushes on their faces and a look of lust and admiration in their eyes. He ever wondered if this is what Sasuke ever went through with his fan club. With how annoying it is, he wondered if that was the pushing point. Naruto's mind went to a very logical place at the moment and thought that, having beautiful women constantly throwing themselves at him, it's not a really bad thing to live with, as all Naruto was thinking. Better them than going to an accused child molester. Orochimaru or beautiful woman. Orochimaru or beautiful woman. Sigh. What a hard choice, Naruto said as he chuckled to himself. Anyway, it went unnoticed by him of course, but Jiraiya eventually pointed it out with a jealous look about his face. Naruto had to admit, It helped his confidence at an important time in his life, what with his problems with Sasuke and his broken promise to Sakura, his feelings going ignored by the one he truly felt like he loved at the time, and then he finds out that if it ever came to a point where he could never have Sakura. And there has been so many times. There might be some sliver of hope that he could be with another. He just wanted to hear someone, hell anyone, utter the small, but oh so significant sentence, I love you. His mind went white for a second, his body froze, a sharp pain flashed through his head. His head ached at the thought, his mind was rushing as images of the fated battle between him and one of the pains rushed and raced through his mind. An outline of someone he just couldn't make out appeared. He tried desperately to remember this individual, but the image faded into the shadows of his mind. He felt relieved and relaxed after a while. He chuckled sadly to his lonely self. The mere thought of someone uttering, I love you, made his body react negatively. His chuckle slowly faded as his mind began to wonder if he could ever accept a person saying that to him. Now granted, ever since he saved the village, hearing, I love you, from random strangers was very common to him right now, but it wasn't exactly the sentence, yet the look in the eye, the closeness of him and her, how he could slowly grab the person and give them a wholehearted smile and hug. Thinking about love, it sounded so unrealistic to him. Not that he didn't believe in romantic love, he has seen it with his own eyes, whether it be between a man and woman, or same, it really didn't matter to him, love was love. But the thought of him with another, that he believed, truly loved him, not for his political position or how high he is ranked, or even how good looking he is, just someone that accepted him, and that means all of him, and that shamefully includes the fox. And in his mind, realistically, he just doesn't think a woman or a lover could look past that damn demon fox in his gut. Two women sneezed at the same time, one in Suna and another somewhere I just couldn't make out at the moment. He sighed as he looked around. His sight traveled to another corner in his tent, seeing a pile of gifts, in the other corner from several of the ninja clans, but mostly from merchant and land-rich families, looking to get on the better side of the leader of their village. Naruto just looked at it with a frown. He remembered most of those family names. They were usually the worst, not just ignoring, but making fun of his existence, pointing and spreading rumors, calling him names, everything, and now that he was the commander-in-chief, they were trying to win back some favor, simply disgusting. He went to his feet with a grunt, and made his way to the tent exit. He opened the loose fabric and took in a sight that he truly loved. Naruto could see the hills and rivers, covered with various different colored trees and raging rivers in the distance, but what really made the view was the several tents surrounding a single large campfire, with villagers helping one another, buildings being erected in the distance, and the elderly and young, talking with that special language that was held between grandchildren and grandparents. Naruto sat on a small wooden chair that he placed next to his tent, just for this beautiful sight. As Naruto breathed in a deep breath of fresh air, he couldn't help but notice the change in his demeanor. He felt more reserved during times where he would have blown up and learned when to embrace quiet times like this. Although with all the improvements to his personality he was constantly stressed at the same time, the stress and pressures the position held were far from Naruto's young imagination. His father, the third, Granny Tsunade, and he was sure the first and second Hokage were all plagued by the curse of paperwork, and they regularly announced their displeasure to whomever cared to listen. Originally Naruto felt that they were just lazy and were overreacting to the large amounts of paperwork, but after experiencing just several days of 8-hour shifts, granted with all the destruction and chaos he may get a few more than average, but he was already starting to feel the stress after just a few days is a bit concerning. And without the thrill of a possible S-ranked mission looming, and combine that with the knowledge that you can't leave and that the most powerful ninja within the village is being used as a simple political figure, signing papers and kissing babies, where he could be out training, becoming stronger to protect his village. He sighed, it was a flawed system. Naruto pulled his Konoha headband off and placed it on his lap as he stared at the symbol of the Leaf Village. As he stared, he couldn't help but feel his ambition disappear. He felt that his sole goal in life was to become accepted by the people of the village, and with his achievement in hand, and his Hokage position being handed or forced, some would say to him. Naruto would wonder what a young 6-year-old Naruto would have done in his situation, most likely embrace it and berate him for being, how he was being. Sigh. And the position of Hokage was, to Naruto, a position that demanded acceptance, respect and love, something that as a child, he wanted the most and would do anything for it, whether it was stealing the Hokage's scroll in the middle of the night, whether it was a Hyuga genius saying he could never achieve his goals, and that life was destiny's bitch, all the blockades that stood between him and his current position as leader of the Leaf Village, made him who he is. The most stubborn, knuckle-headed, unpredictable ninja of Konoha. Hell of all the shinobi lands. And now seeing himself as a more reserved man, who has no goal, who lost his ambition, lost his fire, well, it made him sad. He thought that once he was handed the Hokage's hat and as the masses clapped and cheered in the distance, the curtains would close or he would walk into the sunlight as it happens in all of those great, heroic stories. But with this newfound reality pushed upon him, he realized something else is going to be needed from him, whether it be a goal or ambition that seemed out of this world to anyone, even a Hokage. Naruto continued thinking. With all the available resources, he could do anything. Anything. The thought lingered deep within the depths of his mind. War, peace, economy, education, damn near everything was within his grasp. Anything. He thought of how flawed the Genin team system was, he could change that. His mind traveled to how the clans were allowed special grounds accessed only to them, he could stop that. The improper conduct of the Anbu ops in certain areas and villages, Iwa, Suna, etc., etc. The bribes taken by the gatekeepers to let in illegal aliens and enemy spies in. The easily accessed and undermanned jutsu library. Their lack of genjutsu users and overly favored ninjutsu users. The lack of security in the lower poorer areas and the high amount of security in the rich areas. It could all change, just because of him, all because of him. He could make a difference. He could make the difference of his village prospering into a land of rich, strong and peaceful people, to his village being a mere afterthought in the history pages. The thought excited him. He leapt from his lone chair and made his way to the Hokage's tent, his tent. Things were going to change, a lot of things. Naruto currently was on his work chair shirtless and sweaty with all the excitement of his newfound power and influence. Naruto put his writing hand down, read in overuse as he finished a letter to his best friend the Kage. Naruto smiled as he folded the letter and stamped the seal of the Hokage on it. Naruto's smirk never left as he looked at the letter. He still hasn't told Gaara about his promotion. He wanted to surprise his best friend, he was sure he would be happy for him. Naruto really looked forward to this. Shizune. He called for his recently assigned assistant. Yes, Hokage-sama, she said, her face a little flushed at the sight of a shirtless Hokage. I need you to get this to the Kage as soon as possible, he said with a smile, seeing the red-faced Shizune. Is it time? Naruto said with a serious voice. In 10 minutes, the ceremony will begin and you will begin your announcement to the village, Shizune said with a lustful eye. Also, I need you to get me Kakashi, he said, grabbing another piece of paper and handing it to his assistant. Shizune's eyes were transfixed on the body of Naruto's, the muscles and rippling biceps, the hardened muscles covering every inch of his stone-sculpted body, small scars in places that seemed to enhance his rugged looks, the small layer of sweat covering his body and the candle in the background seemed to make him look like a god. Shizune. Shizune. Naruto repeated as he waved his hand over her face, trying to get her attention. Ah yes, Hokage-sama, she said, looking shyly away from him as his body was so close to hers. Can you do that for me? Naruto asked innocently to his sister figure. You can do anything to M. I mean yes. Yes, Naruto-kun, I mean Hokage-sama, she said as she left in a hurry to finish her tasks, while a small amount of blood leaking out of her left nostril. But before she could leave, Naruto grabbed her arm. She looked at the sad face of Naruto and wondered what was happening. I'm sorry, he said, hugging her. Shizune closed her eyes as the warmth spread around her. I just want to thank you for stopping me during the Kumo meeting. He paused. Things got a bit out of hand. I just want to thank you, he said, still holding her close. Shizune closed her eyes as the warmth seemed to overload her senses. Her mind went numb as he held her close. Thank you. The village hidden in the rocks. Show them what you got. Akazuki, Kurozuchi, please take good care of Tsuchikage-sama, one of the elders called out. The shortest and oldest man in all of Iwa and quiet possibly all of the shinobi lands, held his hip in pain as he readied himself mentally for a long and most definitely painful trip. Ah, it's a pain going to a meeting at my age. The man said, leaning against his old trusty staff. You youngsters don't understand what it's like when your hips are virtual time bombs, yelled to his followers as he looked out at his lands. The female bodyguard, named Kurozuchi, currently wearing the standard uniform of Iwa Jonin, replied, with netting covering her legs and a look about her face. Why don't retire you then, Gramps? You can't really rely on your former glory forever, she said, laughing at the look her superior gave her. The biggest of the three, a very large and hefty man named Akazuki, with a smile, leaned down while laughing. Ahahaha, I'll take your luggage, Tsuchikage-sama, the big man said with a smile. The old man glared out at the mountain of a man and made a threatening stance which to an average viewer seemed very hilarious. An old man that reached to the bottom of his knees pointing at a man whose forehead reached some clouds was very funny. Don't touch, Akazuki. I don't need your help. The old man then placed the straps securely to his shoulders, glared at his bodyguards. His last thought before lifting was, I'll show em. A loud groin-holding, heart-stopping, hair-raising snap, to the point where Kurozuchi had to flinch at the sound. The Tsuchikage's eyes popped out as his mouth opened to record proportions. It all went white before. A sharp flash of pain rushed through his body. It didn't seem that bad until a second passed, then another, and holy sweet Kami, a Kage can only go through so much. He has faced bloody limitless enemies, he has gone through hours and hours of torture, yet these damn hips. Oh, my hips, the old man screaming to the heavens in agony, his body clenched inwards as the unpleasant feeling never left his elderly body. Every single muscle screamed at him to put the damn bag down. The only thing keeping him upright was the shock and Iowa pride that he was famous for. Kurozuchi, with a huge smile, laughing at the old man's condition, she looked at the pain-filled man, said, So, what do you say, should you send someone else in your place? The old Kage managed to say in the middle of feminine screams, Don't be ridiculous, who do you think I am? He pointed an accusing at his disrespectful bodyguard. He screamed to the clouds, I am the great and fearsome leader of Iwagakure. He looked dead in the eyes of Akazuki. I'll carry my own language, he said, threatening the giant man with his manners and stuff. Kurozuchi sighed and pinched the bridge of her nose. Good grief, what a stubborn old man. Akazuki decided against the will of his commander. He then lifted the old man and his luggage and said with a huff, All right, carry your own luggage then, let's go. The old Kage wanted to fight back, but the soft fat of Akazuki meshed well with his lower back. He never felt better. He decided, what the hell, and enjoyed the ride. The village hidden in the water. Now take good care of yourself. The head Jonin said as he looked at the Mizukage's bodyguards. The elderly advisor then slowly handed the hat of the Mizukage to the newly assigned wearer, happy to see a young face smile at his old and weary face, full of wisdom and age. The elderly man's hand wavering and shook due to his age, while the others watched with a smile. Don't let anything go wrong, the old man whispered as he leaned in deeply to his ceremonial snake staff. The Mizukage replied, holding the hat on her hand, and said, I swear on my name as Mizukage, that I will fulfill my duty to my village, she said in her elegant and soft voice, a voice that just didn't seem to suit that of killers such as herself. The old man slowly turned and shook less as he then turned to her escorts. Ow. Chojuro, please guard. Mizukage dono. Well, I think I'll be fine. Probably, said the boy holding a very large sword the shape of a dried fish on his back, adjusting his glasses as sweat poured down slowly his neck. Not being used to all this attention, the elder replied slowly. Have faith in yourself, you are strong, he said with a grandfather-like smile. That why you were chosen to guard me, okay Chojuro. The Mizukage looked down at the nervous boy and smiled. Chojuro blushed like a tomato and nodded with a smile. Chojuro thought with a blush, she's so kind. Yeah, I'll try my best, he said with his blush still predominant on his face. I hope, he finished. All you need to say is, yes ma'am, no one wants to hear your waffling, Ao said quite rudely to the younger of the two. A man. You kids these days. Just be a man. Ao ranted on, but the Mizukage went blank as those two words seemed to mix. What did he say? A man. A man. Need a man. Need a man. The Mizukage suddenly appeared beside Ao, who was still telling Chojuro off. I'm just giving the kid advice when I was his age. Shut up Ao or I'll kill you. The Mizukage whispered into his ear with enough venom laced in her voice to kill any lesser man. Ao just looked at the Mizukage as if she was crazy. She was crazy. He wasn't going to harsh on the boy, was he? Is that why she threatened him? Why was it she threatened him whenever he talks to Chojuro? Come on Chojuro, she said sweetly. Ao, let's go, she said harshly at the man who thinks it's funny that she needs a man. Oh, but how it is true it was seeing the skies above. Would there ever be one for her? Would there ever be a happy ending for a woman in the position of power? If only there was some handsome powerful nin out there that can challenge her. If only. The village hidden in the clouds. Darui, let's go, said the Rakage, readied himself and jumped through the glass-stained window in a dramatic fashion. Follow me, the impatient Rakage yelled as he expected his bodyguards to follow in suit. The Rakage's secretary held her head as she sighed, not again. Both she and Darui stood up from kneeling and said, let's go Darui, she said, encouraging his fellow Jonin to follow. Nah, I think I'll use the door. I'll catch up with you soon enough, Darui said lazily. She was about to follow until he saw where the Rakage landed. Hey Darui, look, he said, pointed at where he landed. Darui just groaned inwardly as he saw where he landed. Darui handed she a purse of gold coins, who she just pocketed immediately. Wow, pinpoint really, Darui said, although disappointed with the impressed with the landing. I think he did it on purpose, she said, looking down at the poor man. Nah, no sane man would do that on female Anbu night, Darui said with a sad voice. Female bathhouse is the reason for living for all men, yet it kills so many, she said in a voice filled with wisdom on the fact. Amen, Darui said. ... So stairs it is, she said as he couldn't watch the carnage anymore. Yay. I think that's the best decision right now, Darui said, agreeing with the other Jonin. The village hidden in the sand. The fifth Kage looked away from the desert sun, as his vision traveled to the civilians who loved him to the point of seeing him off on an especially hot desert day there to see him off. The people he swore to protect, the civilians, the ninja, the children and the elderly he would risk his life for, the people, his life, his precious people. Please take care of yourself, Gara-sama. Temari-san, Kankuro-san, please take good care of Kage-sama. Temari waved her hand to the villagers, her cloak moving with the desert wind. We will, she said with a smile as she waved her fan. Kankuro, however, rolling his eyes and said, not like he needs bodyguards anyway, upset he had to leave, he rather stay home and work on his new creation. Gara said simply as he turned his back to the villagers, all right. Let's go, he said in his steady voice. Kankuro was about to say something but a shadow and a flash caught the Sand siblings' attention. Yes, Anbu-san, Gara said as Konoha Anbu approached him. He was strong enough to take on this Anbu and he didn't feel any negative or aggressive auras from the man, so they wouldn't do anything brash. I have a message from the Hokage, the Anbu said in a soft voice, bowing as he handed the Kage his scroll. Gara read the scroll carefully. He reread it just to be sure of what Konoha was asking. What is it about, Gara? Temari asked, curious about the message. We are to meet and travel with the Hokage, Gara said as his eyes were fixated on the handwriting. It seemed familiar. Why? Kankuro asked, confused as of why Leaf would make such a request. Seems to me a sort of symbol of our new alliance, Temari said aloud, more to herself than to the others present, to show our unity with each Leaf, Temari thought with her highly intelligent political science remark. When in reality it was Naruto wanting to pull a prank on Gara. Sounds about right, Kankuro said, thinking that it was the right time to sound like he knew what was being said around him, when he really didn't have a clue. Yay, 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 Kankuro, Temari said, seeing through the little game her younger brother was playing. Enough now, Anbu-san, you may leave, he said as the nin nodded, bowed and left for home. Off to the summit, the Mizukage ran with the wind as she followed Chojuro and outtailing her. As the time passed she couldn't help but feel the loss of warmth at her side, the lonely feeling that she knew her home would be empty when she returned. The thought that always stayed with her was that she in fact needed a man. She was an old-fashioned type when it came to her men. She wanted a man that was powerful, a man that would protect her, and with her being a Kage-level nin that already gave her slim pickings. She would want a man that had that rugged look about his face, not some fancy high-nosed spoiled daimyo, but a war hero, a man with a few scars, a man that was tough and knew when to take over, that knew when to tell her often, call her a slew. Her mind was racing, her body was heating and getting damp, sweat was forming in more than one place. She prayed that her bodyguards were concentrating on the surroundings and not herself. She heard Ao say something. Not being in the mood, she immediately cut him off. Say any more and I'll kill you, she said in a horny and angry mood. Ao just stopped in his tracks. He was just saying what lovely weather it was and she cut him off with another death threat. Geez, what did he do? He thought, scratching his head in confusion. Chojuro was as equally confused, trying to lighten up the mood. He said the first thing that came to his mind. Now, summit, here we come, he said as everyone else sweat dropped. Faster, Akazuki, faster, the old Kage yelled as he rode his bodyguard like a betting horse. We are nearly there, Akazuki said in a serious voice. I can't make it. Stop, the old Kage said in an injured voice. His old eyes saw a green bush to the side. He rushed as fast as a Kage could run. He turned a corner for privacy and let nature run its course. Akazuki looked at the smaller Jonin. You had to feed him some of that ramen crap, didn't you? He said, shaking his head disapprovingly. I didn't know it would do that, Kurozuchi said, trying to hold back a small laughing fit. He's an old man, You know he would have been crowning by the time we were too far from any of the public toilets, Akazuki said. The sound of 10-kilogram heavy mud landing against the ground came their ears, then a pained voice screaming to the heavens. My hips! The cage screamed. Are you ready, Naruto-kun? Shizune said, seeing the Hokage in full uniform. Wait a sec, Shizune said, pulling down the Hokage hat's veil. Let's make it a big surprise for everyone, she said with a small chuckle. I'm ready, Naruto said as the doors opened, hearing the full blast of the masses below, ready to celebrate a new part of their village, a new part of their history. The morning clouds parted as the rising sun emerged. Citizens and shinobi, merchants and famers, the young and elderly all gathered together for the ceremonial Hokage announcement. Every citizen was waiting for their new leader impatiently, all at a single spot, a truly amazing sight for any and all to see. Guy-sensei. Lee. Guy-sensei. Lee. Ga. Would you guys cut it out already? The angry Tenten yelled as the crowd of innocent civilians and children cringed at the sight of two men holding each other, with a sunset in the background. The crowd gave a small thankful applause to the savior of the moment and then went about their business. Tenten blushed at the attention, and as it soon faded she shot a deadly glare at the green beast duo as she continued to rant off her early morning fumes. You two can have your borderline moments at some other time, she said, talking over their responses filled with comments. We're not gay, and such. Right now we and every single citizen and ninja of Konoha is here. Can you two behave without me being reminded of your spandex, steroid-enhanced eyebrow ways, she said in way a mother disciplines her child. But, no buts, she said, cutting off Lee before he could even start. Be quiet, be still, and no hugging, she said, finishing it off with an unsheathed kunai being unleashed. Neji just watched with a smirk as the top taijutsu shinobi get talked down to like mere children, who knew she had that sort of a temper. Hush now, I believe the ceremonial induction is beginning, Neji said, trying to calm his rather dysfunctional team down. The other three quieted down as more and more civilians and shinobi gathered to the small cliff. The mind of a shadow genius slowly and strategically thought about what his father told him in secret, of one of his close friends, Naruto Uzumaki, was being appointed temporary Hokage and if voted, the actual 6th Hokage. Naruto Uzumaki, Rokudaime Hokage, has a nice spin to it. Shikamaru smiled happily as he thought of what joy Naruto was going through, to have his dreams, so suddenly and so quickly. He and Gaara were probably the youngest Kages of all time. He remembered the times his fellow classmates mocked Naruto for still being a genin, and now he made the spring to the most powerful position in all of Konoha. Unfortunately, his strategic mind couldn't help but go over the negatives and the downs in his personality, the hows or ifs, in the conversation of Naruto. He was a very, very troublesome man. He sighed as his gaze was caught and fixated at the lone cloud in the shady sky. He was a very, very, very troublesome man. Sigh. And now he was his leader. Damn. But a troublesome man or not, Shikamaru would risk his life for the blonde. He had done so much in return for his own safety and the safety for his loved ones, it would be enough for Shikamaru to do. As he thought more on the subject, an irritated Yamanaka looked at a silent Nara, deciding to have a little fun while the rest of the late sleepers joined for the ceremony. She gave a little finger jab to the temple. Why are you so quiet, Shika? Ino said as she poked the lazy shadow manipulator. Oh, nothing. He trailed off as his gaze followed the few morning clouds that so easily attracted his attention. Ino growled at the small attention span of the so-called genius. Seriously, what would it take for him to pay attention, for goodness sake? While all this commotion was accruing, Choji munched happily on his brand new barbecue potato chips, while he watched Ino talk down Shika as he tried his best to ignore her. While that would be hard for any normal human, He has years of experience from ignoring a far more annoying mother than this weaker version of his mum. Shika, she said as she poked him in the temple. Poke. Shika. Poke. Shika. Poke. Shika. Choji just sat back and laughed at the Shikamaru's expression changing to different shades of anger, annoyed all the way to murderous. Before the next poke could stab him in the temple, Choji finally put a halt to the little show they were playing. He could see the flag rising and several people emerging from the tents. The people around him slowly settled down, and as the sounds could be heard was the morning bird rising from their sleep, singing beautifully to the crowds that waited impatiently below. Ino still wanted a reaction from the lazy man though. Poke. Damn it, Ino. Shut up, Akamaru. The dog barked his reply. No, you shut up. Another bark or reply in the Inuzuka clan. The rest of Kiba's team separated from the noisy dog boy as he got into another argument over what species was better. It usually ended into a fist and paw fight between the two pups. Now usually Shino or Hinata would settle the issue down before it went too far, but unfortunately the other two would find themselves buried within their own thoughts. Usually Hinata would call Akamaru away or Shino would distract Kiba with an interesting bug that would catch his attention. The Hyuga was in a particularly deep trance as she thought of her only love. Hinata's mind was racing ever since she has been fully conscious. She remembered her confession. Unfortunately, it all goes black after that. Her face is still red with the thought. Shino has his collar even higher than usual. His shades were planted firmly on his face, hiding his eyes from anyone's view. Humans never like the ability to not see into a person's eyes. It is unnerving. And Shino was in the league with Kakashi about how much he would reveal about himself, so it was hard enough to know what he was thinking. But deep down in the depths of the young manipulator's mind, the news his father had told to him in secret, an S-rank secret to be exact, was, well, disturbing. It was a secret about the Yondaime Hokage and one of his closest friends, Naruto Uzumaki. All while the commotion of waking up earlier and complaints from the younger generation were heard, especially the songs of birds and the concerned talks between friends, the outrageous fits between the shinobi teams. Sakura and Sai each talked to the other, idly chatting about nothing right now, neither expecting what dramatic change will happen, only expecting a new Hokage to announce their position. Hidden Hokage emerges for small second. The arrangements went to the detail. First the twin advisors, both to the right side of the Hokage, symbolizing the Hokage's involvement with politics, then the Anbu captain and Jonin commander to the left, symbolizing the Hokage's military involvement and power overall in the village. Shikaku was the first to step up. The entire crowd was silent, except a loud groan from the Jonin commander's son. He sped through a small jutsu that allowed his voice to be heard far, for all to hear. He cleared his throat and quickly began a troublesome speech. We are here today, he paused, to mourn the past and embrace the future, he said, finished with a small cough. I am here to present you the man who will lead us through these dark times. The tent doors parted as a figure dressed entirely of the ceremonial Hokage robes. He approached the small wooden ledge and placed his hands firmly down as the crowd politely applauded their new leader. Naruto grinned as he nodded to his Jonin commander. Shikaku smirked as he continued. Your new Hokage, he paused. Naruto's grin was set firmly as he awaited the reactions. He placed his hand on his Hokage hat. As he removed it, Shikaku finished his short speech. Naruto Uzumaki, the sixth Hokage. The very crowd was in shock. The hero of Konoha was now its leader. The elders were in deep thought as of the skills that Naruto would bring to the position, while the younger generation wouldn't give a heap. The younger members of the crowd began shouting and screaming for their newly appointed leader. The ninja applauded as the civilians went crazy with the new revelation. He was their leader. He had protected them from hell and more. Who else could be any better for the position? The roar of the crowd seemed to never stop. The smiles, the whistles and cheers for Naruto was a bit overwhelming as a small warm tear fell down his right eye as it slowly made its way down his cheek. He never, ever thought this moment would happen. Even after he was officially appointed Hokage, he really thought that Tsunade would awaken from her forced slumber, or the council would decide against him, or the daimyo would reconsider his decision, or. He didn't really know, but he knew that it is now officially his dream of making his speech to the loving villagers below, was now a reality. It was happening now and he couldn't be happier. The applause and cheering didn't seem to stop or slow down as Naruto wiped his tear and raised his hand, indicating he was ready to speak. The crowd's cheers lowered and lowered to the silence, ignoring the few people yelling at the top of their lungs, "We love you," and such. He spoke to himself, reading his wavering voice as it was weak with emotion and nervousness from public speaking. He was never one to speaking to large crowds. Sigh. He was getting the attention he wanted as a child, so he should be sort of happy. He breathed steadily and slowly as he looked out at the countless heads staring directly at him, all wondering when he would begin. He counted down as the jutsu was soon applied to his voice, allowing all to hear him. Citizens and shinobi of Konoha. He paused as the cheering began again. He let out a happy sigh as he needed a small break. "We have suffered," he said as the cheering slowed down. "We as a people have suffered," he said, gaining small confidence at the looks of admiration from his listeners. "We have suffered death and destruction on So. He paused again as he regained his breathing, not trying to get too ahead of himself. "Death and destruction, whether it is from a war we wanted no part in, whether it is an invasion, whether it is from shinobi, Akatsuki or demon," he paused after saying demon. "Seeing our homes burn, families die, it is a sight I never wished for my people, yet it is what makes us, the people of Konoha, strong," he said, putting emphasis on the word strong. "Would any other village survive 3 wars? He shook his head as the cheering slowly clapped to the facts he brought up. "Would any other village survive an attack from a not one village, but 2 and become the victor as the day ended?" he said as he shook his head again, ignoring the cheer as it slowly got louder and louder. "Would any village survive against the might of Akatsuki and emerge as the victor?" He shook his head again as he waited for the masses below to calm. "Would any village, at all, survive the might of the 9-tailed demon and not only survive, but prosper and become the great and strong village we were, that we are?" He paused, slightly happy that the ones who knew the truth didn't stop or lessen in their clapping. Yet for some unknown reason to every foreign village out there, after every attack, every invasion, we rebuild and leave the dark times behind us and prosper. He paused again as the cheering roared again. "We prosper," he paused. "We prosper as the dominant force of the shinobi lands," he shouted over the very loud cheers from the young genin. "We have suffered, no one can deny it," he said as he looked downwards as he had to finally reveal his secret. "But as a village, we will stand together, we will rebuild and prosper once again," he said, finishing his speech to the masses below as the roar of applause seemed to reach its climax as the cheering never seemed to stop. Naruto smiled as he rose his hand. The crowd seemed to calm somewhat and Naruto felt somewhat awkward with this unofficial control over the villagers. "As being so young, I would understand that some of the older, more experienced citizens of Konoha would be doubtful of my position," he spoke carefully. The crowd went quiet as some of the younger members of the crowd had the nerve to even glare at their parents and grandparents for just making their Hokage and hero doubt himself. "But if you give me the opportunity, just one chance, that's all I ask of," he spoke carefully. "And as the newly appointed Hokage, I have already made my first law and I have disbanded one previous law." He paused as he readied his announcement that would change not his village but that of the other villages, Iwa, Kumo especially. The first was an S-rank secret hiding my father and mother's name from me all these years. The silence was filled with innocent curiosity. I will announce my family's blood, the Uzumaki clan and the Namikaze clan. Unlike last time, there was no applause, no cheers, but whispers. People tore their vision away from their leader and talked among themselves, whispering and talking, only taking small glances to see the large amount of similarities between the fourth and, now, the sixth. The color of the hair, the style and length. Naruto was shorter than his two fathers, but he was still early in his years. The medium build, and deep blue eyes that made the woman gaga. The defined and lean body, the stone-cut muscles and small scars from past battles. The really only difference was the large whisker marks or birth marks, or whatever that gave a feral, foreign look that seemed outlandish and so masculine to most women. And to the few people that had the privilege to know both men close enough could see the similarities in their personalities, most silently berated themselves as it was so obvious now that the cloak was taken away from their eyes. Both were strong and resourceful on the punch, smart and strategic when needed. While Minato was a fair bit smarter and calmer, while Naruto was a bit hot-headed and less smarter than his father, he more than made up with the few traits he picked up from his loving mother. Minato was a calm and collected man at all times. He was creative and imaginative, was a loyal man to his friends and eventually woman. He was considered by most the most powerful of shinobi and loyal friend to all, and feared rival and enemy. He was not that physically strong or fast, but he used his wits and superior chakra control and creative jutsus to defeat his enemies. His supposed mother was the beautiful, hot-headed, tomboy from Whirlpool, while most considered her a simple one-and-done woman on the long list of the infamous Yondaime. But both of them saw something in one another, and one thing led to another as love was slowly formed in secret. Not much was known about Kushina, apart from a few small facts: green eyes, red hair, from a faraway land, a destroyed village and a killed clan. Naruto rose his left hand, and the gossip suddenly came to a stop, eyes all resting again on him. Sigh, he would never get used to this. My father is a good man. I love my father and my mother, but right now, my duty is to you, to the people of this village, he said as the crowd was still silent. But my people, these dark times are never to leave us as long as the threat known simply as Akatsuki, he said as he paused as the crowd booed at the name of the accursed organization. He smiled at the reaction, gaining some sort of confidence. He continued. I have been summoned to a meeting with the Kages of the major villages. We will meet in neutral grounds and discuss our means to end the damned organization that has caused us so much. He paused at the word, pain. While I will be away, my sensei Kakashi shall take my place as I will be away at the summit. Kakashi will organize the supplies and safety of border, and on my return we will begin the reconstruction of our village. He finished as the crowd once again clapped and cheered for Naruto and the future of the village. As Naruto waved to the people one final time, he passed through the tent's door. He saw a couch and ran for it before his knees gave out. He dived face first and gave out a sigh of relaxation. Before he could feel sweet slumber approach, he called for an Anbu, Neko. He called the first Anbu's name that came to mind, a woman with flowing dark purple hair and a cat Anbu mask and uniform. Yes, Hokage-sama, she said in her militarized tone. Send for. He thought of the calmest and safest bet. Nara, Shikamaru, and who else would be useful in a way he could protect himself and show the strength of Konoha in times of weakness. Hyuga, Neji, that is all, he said as he slowly and surely fell to a deep and happily welcomed nap, even if it was for a short while. Uzumaki, the man whispered as he stared down at the genin photo. A surge of chakra made him look up at the plant-like figure bowing before him. Changes are going to made, he said as he calculated what changes were needed. Bring me Sasuke, his team, and he thought of the best candidate for the job he had prepared. Kisame. Naruto placed his Hokage hat on his back, and turned to the many citizens and shinobi waving goodbye to the loved Hokage. Shikamaru just stared at the clouds with his hands in his pockets, while Neji used his Byakugan to scout ahead of where they were heading off to. Kakashi walked closer to the trio as Kakashi saluted to his superior. Be careful with yourself and think before you speak, Kakashi said with a wide-eye smirk. I will, he said to his former sensei. And don't you abuse your powers too much, Naruto said to his sensei as he thought of all the fun he could have. Especially with one green beast of Konoha. Watch over Tsunade and take care of yourself, Naruto said as he signaled to his bodyguards to be ready. He waved one final goodbye to the good people of Konoha and left in a puff of smoke. The Kage of Suna waited patiently for his fellow Kage. He wished he could say the same for his siblings. He really wished he could. Sometimes he wondered what the previous homicidal version would do in these certain situations. God, what's taking them so long? Temari screamed at no one as she couldn't take staying still much longer. Since no one answered back, she took her anger out on a large amount of trees as she made a powerful wind slice jutsu. While the destruction ceased, Gaara just shook his head as he watched his beloved sister calm down somewhat as Kankuro just sneered at how much his sister could get away with. They are late, his only brother said in an upset voice. Gaara looked at the position of the sun and seeing as they have waited for over an hour, he knew his siblings would start to get irritated. By the time they get here we won't make that much ground before dark, Gaara concluded. Kankuro was about to speak before in the distance he saw three figures and felt the large chakra sources come closer. Finally, Temari whispered as she approached her brother's left side and Kankuro to his right. Danzo watched from afar as the crowds have cheered and waved goodbyes for their new leader. Danzo sneered as his final backup plan was destroyed right in front of his face. He hoped that the elders of the village would convince the younger against the decision of the council. It was far-fetched of course, but it was all he had left. But Naruto made a fatal flaw, which he was going to exploit to the fullest. He smirked as he signaled for his bodyguards. His two closest and strongest root members appeared bowing before him. You called for us, Fu said in an emotionless voice. I have plans for you and Torun, he said, believing if done properly, it could change everything. On the day the Hokage leaves, at midnight, we will begin an assassination plot against Tsunade, he said. Gather 10 of your fellow root members, the strongest of them all, he said as he pulled out a set of headbands. But most importantly, no bloodlines, we don't want anyone knowing we were involved at all, he said as he threw 7 Iwa headbands to the root members. Place these on at my signal, and follow my plans to the T, he said as he chuckled a small evil laugh. Good night, Ao, she said softly as she closed the door to her personal room. She sighed at the sight of an empty bed and a cold room. She pulled her silk robe down as it slowly and gracefully slipped off her slender shoulders. As she slowly and sleepily made her way to bed, the moonlight illuminated her skin, making her look like a goddess as she closed into her comfortable bed. Her vision came across a small vanity mirror. She was now entering her late 20s, and she knew she would never say the true number that killed her a tiny bit whenever it was spoken. She could see the small signs that her age was showing, nothing like wrinkles or the sort, but as her bare skin touched the cool sheets of her bed, she shivered in a sad way. Her mind thought of Mon's touch, a man's warmth, a simple word to her that would leave her stunned and unwilling to make her move away from him. The more she thought about her single woman woes, her bed suddenly got colder and colder. To feel 2 strong arms hold her in comfort and protect her with or without her wanting him to. To know that she wouldn't be alone anymore, to know she wouldn't be judged, wouldn't be objectified, wouldn't be looked down upon, but to be a person who was respected and loved. A small tear escaped her jade green eyes. She hoped her single life woes will end soon. If only she knew. Greetings, Hokage-sama, Gaara said suspiciously as he eyed the masked Hokage. The Hokage bowed his head in respect to his allied Kage of the West, while both bodyguards went to a knee in the presence of the two Kages. Naruto noticed that the Sand siblings had all changed from their normal clothing since last he saw them. Gaara had his usual 100-kilo gorge on his back with some new symbols drawn upon it, his Kage hat secured around his waist and long red desert scarf around his neck, hanging loosely by his knees. He also wore dark Anbu-like trousers and long-sleeved shirt with his Jonin jacket to end it off. Temari had her hair in her traditional 4 ponytails and had moved her headband to her forehead holding her fringe out. She too had a desert scarf. Unlike Gaara's blood red, hers was a clean white and covered most of her torso. She had a short skirt on and fishing net underneath, long shin pads and shoes on, and a white cape at the back, while she had all her packing underneath her and a large summoning scroll at the back of her hip. And Kankuro, ah, well, he has, yay, a different shade of make-you war paint. Gaara and Temari eyed the hidden Hokage, Kankuro especially, as he was looking forward to seeing the busty slug princess. Now seeing a normal-sized man seemed to disappoint him, rather than make him suspicious of the man. Hokage-sama, would you please unmask yourself? Gaara said suspiciously. Why, of course, Kage-sama, he said as he slowly removed the fabric ever so slowly. To reveal. The fountain of youth shines brightly on this beautiful day, Kage-sama. All present were bold, experienced, hardcore shinobi in every sense, but the henge that was so damn realistic to the point that it was eye-watering. A small puff and a chuckling Naruto later brought everyone out of their funk and back to life. Naruto, what the hell are you doing here? Kankuro yelled as he pointed a finger at the laughing blonde. As glad as I am to see you, I was expecting the. Gaara's mind went to work at the presence of his best friend. Congratulations on the promotion, Gaara said with an unusual smirk across his face, proud of his brother's achievement. What? Temari said, confused at what he said. Spoilsport, Naruto said with a smirk to match his fellow Kage. Care to explain, Gaara? Kankuro said, scratching his temple at what the two were saying to one another. Gaara stood next to Naruto as he held his arm out. I present you the Rokudaime Hokage of Konoha, he said with an uncharacteristic laugh. Shizune watched Sakura perform a routine checkup on the comatose Tsunade. The green glow caught her attention as she watched the small glow slowly heal any unseen wounds. She looked out towards the night sky feeling a bit worried for no reason. Something was out there watching her. She felt a shiver run up her spine as she hurriedly closed the curtains and brushed the feeling off as she handled some hospital paperwork that needed to be finished. At least we made some ground, Gaara said as he pointed at their position on the high-budget map. Another day and we'll make it by noon, Naruto said, calculating the distance and how fast the group was as a whole. I guess we should make camp, Shikamaru said as he looked around at the surroundings. Couldn't we find a tavern or something? Temari said as she looked desperately for the symbol representing an inn on the map. Temari was a hardcore tomboy of a shinobi, but she had grown accustomed to a bed over a hard, insect-infested ground. There's one about half an hour to the east, Shikamaru pointed out on the map. Right, it's decided then, Temari said aloud as she grabbed her pack. Some thought to disagree, but all thought it was a bit too troublesome for them to argue with the determined Kunoichi. They all grabbed their packs and made their way to their new destination. Curious about how Naruto ended out as the Hokage, Temari asked as politely as she could. Yo Blondie, how did you end up the Hokage anyway? Running low on good shinobi already, Temari said in a teasing tone. Temari, said Gaara, trying to sound formal but was just as curious as his older sister. Naruto chuckled as he walked to the inn. Neji just stayed in the back with his Byakugan flaring wildly looking at all directions. I was promoted for an array of reasons, 2 more than the rest I would guess, he said as his hand pulled his Hokage hat off to hang off his neck. Tsunade is, in a comatose state. She, pushed herself a bit far, during the invasion and then her body just couldn't keep up with all the strain, he said, a little bit uncomfortable speaking about his only mother figure in his life in such a vulnerable position. And I guess the second reason would have to be the fact that I, defeated the invaders, he said in an honest and humble tone, not noticing the small gaps in both Kankuro and Temari's mouth. The invaders, you mean Pain and his bodies, Kankuro said in a shocked tone. Ah, kind of, he said again in that modest tone that seemed a bit off to the Sand siblings expect Gaara, wondering why he wasn't embracing the attention as he would have as a child. Gaara knew Naruto was past the phase of needed attention. As a Kage he most certainly has his own fair share of his attention from the villagers. Gaara went through it. It was pretty amusing to see someone like him go through what he went through with his very eyes. The small trip to the inn was pretty uneventful. Small talks here and there. Most kept their thoughts to themselves as they noticed the sun setting was a bit concerning to a shinobi, but to know that they were all very skilled shinobi, especially with 2 Kages among their ranks, they were a little less worried. The group pasted a rather steep hill to come across the small inn. Nothing special about it. It was a dark brown color covered the walls, while the roof was a dark rusted green. A small stable filled with a few animals. A small sign outside the door was hanging off a small ledger, with what might have been red paint, which has long gone and replaced with dirt and rust, with a few letters that Neji was able to make out as, the Grey Dragon. Everyone sighed at the condition that they was in. Shikamaru really wasn't bothered as he finally found a place to just sleep and carry on with his cloud watching. Neji and Gaara weren't bothered at all as they found the place alright and suitable for the night, while Temari was rather disappointed at the sight of the inn. So, we're here, I guess, Kankuro said scratching his cheek, rubbing the war paint off slightly. Better than nothing I guess, Naruto shrugged as he led the way to the inn. The rest of the group followed in suit as they made their way to the old inn. Naruto was the first to open without a care. Neji watched the tavern with his Byakugan flaring, so Naruto wasn't expecting anything unexpected. As the group entered they came across a surprising sight of a decent to not that bad looking inn. It had a counter with an elderly lady reading a small book in one hand next to a small candle, 2 wooden tables, a few chairs, a lit fireplace and a bookcase filled with what seemed like outdated, worn-out books and novels by persons Naruto or any of his particular group had known. Naruto and Gaara approached the elderly man whose vision didn't seem to notice the new members in his humble business. Gaara coughed to catch the man's attention. The man seemed startled by the sound but he regained himself. Welcome young ones to the Grey Dragon, best service in all the lands, the man said with a proud voice. I am your honored host Daichi, and you are, he said asking for their names. Gaara. Naruto. How many rooms? Sirs, he said as he pulled a small leather book out. 6 please, said Gaara. We have 9 available so take your pick, Daichi said scribbling down some notes as Gaara handed a small purse of gold coins on the counter. Temari and Kankuro raced for the cozy-looking chairs by the fireplace and let out a heavy sigh as they landed on the chairs. Shikamaru and Neji quietly sat at the table, both bored and thinking deep thought that as until Shikamaru's keen eye came across a small shogi board laid across the top of the bookshelf. Do you have any sake? Kankuro shouted. Kakashi grabbed his hair in frustration as more and more documents came into his desk by an all too eager Shizune whom seems too happy to give him this unholy amount of paperwork. Kakashi looked at the small amount of paperwork that Naruto had filled out within the 3 days, and to say the least he was very impressed. He had removed any civilian council member from the village council and created a smaller side council that's power and decisions are based on and only civilian matters. Tsunade, Hiruzen, even Minato had tried moving the stubborn, spoiled, inbreed civilians to a position of lesser power, but none could find a way. Being Hokage didn't mean your word was law, it just had a high amount of influence would be the best word to say. But Naruto, somehow find that with the distraction of the invasion he made a small amount of paperwork, making the offer for the civilian council to be turned into the smaller council that they are now. Naturally all the council members would be against this without a second thought, but with the distraction of the invasion the time slot for any argument against the change, no one came and so the decision was made final and the citizen council was made. That wasn't all he had planned. Naruto had builders coming from Suna, Wave and Snow, medics and medicine coming from foreign lands that Shizune probably recommended for Naruto. Naruto moved Anbu from protecting the city border and brought them in to protect the more vulnerable targets, hospitals, granaries, shelters and so. As Kakashi went through more and more paperwork, he felt a small pressure in the air as his senses went haywire. Kakashi handled the situation like the pro he is. He continued writing as his closed Sharingan eye opened beneath his closed headband. His gift from his old teammate definitely came in handy as it easily saw through the thick fabric of his headband. Kakashi felt the several Anbu surrounding him hiding in an Anbu-like manner, but these presences, their chakra signals, they were too well hidden for his likes. Using his past Anbu experience, he could already tell that these shinobi were not on any assassination attempt on his life, they were too far away and he was far too heavily protected for just around a 3-man squad. It was merely a stakeout squad. Kakashi couldn't make a move without them noticing and the same would be said of the team watching him, as the second they moved away from their position he would signal for an Anbu squad and he would be on them in less than 20 seconds. He sighed as he continued his work. Somehow, in this life-threatening situation he still has to do the blasted paperwork. So what's the plan? Naruto said as he drank a small amount of sake, frowning at the bitter taste. To my knowledge, this meeting will revolve around Akatsuki, but Kage's these days, who knows where it might lead off to, Gaara said as he snatched the bottle out of Naruto's hands. A beautiful woman approached Naruto with a predatory look in her eye. Is there anything else I can get you? She said winking at the 6th Hokage, placing her hand on his shoulder, rubbing it softly while trying to stare at Naruto's avoiding eyes. We are fine, Gaara said as politely as he could. Are you sure? She said trying to push her cleavage to the Naruto's line of sight. Completely. Naruto yelled a bit louder than he wanted to. Well, that's fine, but remember, she said with a hushed voice. Naruto had no chance but to look at the dark brown eyes of the intrusive waitress. I am available at all times, and I'm willing to do anything for the costumer. Her hand traveled down from his shoulder to his chest, groping it slightly while talking in that voice that would revive Jiraiya from the dead.